This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
What are some of the most common things you see going wrong with people's guts?
I would say an immense amount of stress and the load on their system.
So tell me, what causes SIBO?
Lots of things cause SIBO. So I think we have to step back for just a second and say that SIBO is a secondary condition. It's not a primary condition.
So tell me, if it's not about food, what is it about?
It's going to be something different for each person.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? Welcome to the Expert Series, where you'll meet 25 of the world leaders in health and wellness, discussing their passions and what it takes to make your shift.
There's an electrical feeling in the room.
I had to be a mom. It was so important to me.
I've always been a pain in the butt, and I love that.
I knew that I wanted to help people.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. Hi, I'm Katherine Maslen, naturopath, author, and host of The Shift. In the Expert Series, we share the insights, stories, and expertise of each of our amazing experts. You might have met them on season 1 of The Shift, where we took snippets of these conversations and put them together into the series. If you haven't listened to season 1 yet, I'd recommend going back and listening to episode 1 on what it takes to make a shift in your gut health. We'll provide a link in the show notes.
In this episode of the Expert Series, we have Angela Pifer, a SIBO specialist nutritionist from Seattle, Washington. Angela is leading the way with her holistic approach to SIBO, or small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, a condition where the bacteria in our small intestines is out of proportion, which, as you will hear, causes all kinds of health complaints. She is one of the USA's most well-known functional medicine, nutrition and health experts, an accomplished speaker and a radio personality. She has over 15 years' experience in functional nutrition and is a vast resource in areas such as digestive health, SIBO, thyroid, autoimmune and gut disorders. As you'll hear, Angela is a wealth of information, and I really enjoyed my time with her when I was in Seattle to record this interview. Listen out for some must-know information about SIBO and digestive function and what you can do about it. Let's get right into it.
Angela Pifer, and I am a certified nutritionist and functional medicine specialist in the Seattle area of the United States for international viewers and listeners. And I've been working for the past 14 years on functional gut disorders with patients. So I work with people that have chronic symptoms, and that can be anywhere from celiac disease or food sensitivities, a specialty that I run, which is SIBO, or inflammatory bowel disease, and everything else that comes with it, because it's usually not just one thing, as we're working with people. So I do that in my clinic, working one-on-one with people. And then I also founded a bone broth company that we produce bone broth in the area.
So you're busy.
Yes. Yes.
Tell me, where are you from?
Here, Seattle. Yeah, Seattle, Washington, born and raised. Yeah. And now that you've visited and you see the lake, and hopefully you get to see it with the sun that just popped out, it's absolutely gorgeous. I mean, absolutely gorgeous. Water's in your view pretty much all the time when you're driving around Seattle, whether at Lake Washington or the Sound. And then we have mountains on pretty much all sides, and it's just gorgeous. So I can get to desert in an hour on Eastern Washington. I can get to the coast with the ocean in an hour and a half. Like, everything is so close. So it's pretty awesome.
It's beautiful. I've been here for 12 hours and I can imagine it's an amazing place to grow up. What was it like growing up here?
It was great. I mean, you have access to everything that you need. Nature's right around the corner. We used to, Mount Rainier, which is, in view. If you're lucky here, it's beautiful. And we'd go up camping all the time. So it was absolutely gorgeous. We got to get out in nature and really enjoy that. Cold on occasion, dark, it's January, right? Not enough sunlight in a lot of months of the year, but summer almost makes up for it.
And what about your high school years? What were they like?
Yeah, it was good and not. I always love it when people have wonderful high school years. I think a lot of people search for things in high school and struggle in high school. as we try to work through it and figure out who we are and who we want to be. I think my best years are definitely my late 20s and early 30s, going through college and going through my master's program and really connecting with what I wanted to do. It gave me a lot of purpose.
What was the moment when you thought, oh, I'm actually really in my groove now?
Coming out with my degree. Honestly, it was actually the funniest thing because I was 32. And it was the first time I'd come out, I'd, set up my shingle, was going to get to work. And it was actually a moment in my head that I said, oh my gosh, I feel like a woman. What's going on? That's so weird because I always feel like such a girl. And it was all of a sudden I had grown up. It was really cool.
So what did you do once you graduated?
Yeah, I set up my own business. Yeah. Oh, I went strictly into, we all work at the Bastyr Center for Natural Medicine for a year. And then I came out and opened up my own practice.
What is a functional nutritionist?
When we look at a functional gut disorder, it means that we've got chronic symptoms that are present. And so something that's more chronic, a lot of work around IBS and that sort of thing. When we look at a functional nutritionist, we're looking to get at the root cause for what's going on. So we're not trying to stick a Band-Aid on a symptom. We're trying to figure out why that symptom is present. And there's things that we can do to help calm that symptom. But if you just keep sticking Band-Aids on something, it's like sticking your finger in a hole in a bucket when the water's coming out and more holes form. There's always something else that's going to come up because you're not addressing the real issue.
Tell me, how did you get into nutrition and health? What's your journey been?
Yeah, actually, my undergrad is in psychology. I was actually going to be a psychologist, and just on a whim, adding an elective in there, I took nutrition and nursing 301. I remember that class very well at the University of Washington, and I'm sitting in a sea of 200 plus people, and they were literally talking about hot dogs, hamburgers, and mac and cheese as major food groups for kids. And it was like one of those surreal moments that you're sitting there and you're watching all this unfold around you, and it's not right, and yet people are having just, oh, this is just what we feed kids. It was a very strange moment. So I did a bit of digging and looking at nutrition and what is presented. And I'd always been interested in it, not, necessarily that bug that was going to be my degree. It was more psychology that I was going to go for. And I realized that this is the only class that doctors have access to in an undergrad, if any, and most of them don't take it. So it was just like on the spur of the moment, completely pivoted, like it's nutrition. So I went into nutrition, and my first love was going to be working with kids. And just kind of funny thing happens on the way to getting your degree. At the very end, you realize that you don't actually work with kids directly. You work with the parents of kids. And I love parents of kids. I love them, but I just shifted gears. I started working more. Actually, at the beginning, I was working a bit with eating disorders and emotional eating out of a center, and then just kind of shifted into more functional gut from there.
Why psychology?
Yeah, I just always been such an interest. How does the brain work? How do we relate to our environment? How do we relate to ourselves? How do we love ourselves? How do we build, beautiful relationships with each other? I mean, that's always just been such a passion of mine. And I think what's interesting too is for all things that happen for a reason, when you get into nutrition, you are only as good as you are in relating to people and getting to connect with them and getting them to tell you what's going on and how they're connecting with food and helping them build habits. So it all happened for a reason. All the work that I did there plays out on the other side as I help to coach people and get them back to center and talk them down and talk them through whatever we're working on.
100%. And that was actually going to be my next question, was like, how did that background and that start in psychology help you deal with the emotional issues that people have around food now?
Everybody has some sort of connection with food, some good, some not good, right? And then, just the varying degrees. So I think as we look at that, it's helping people kind of see through. For the most part, like with any bad habit, it's not about the food. It's not about the habit. It's not about smoking. It's not about whatever other vice they're using, alcohol, that glass of wine every single night, sort of thing. So it's really not about the food at that point. So it's figuring other ways to help them connect with their environment and help fill up their cups so they can meet the needs of everything else they have going on.
So tell me, if it's not about food, what is it about?
It's going to be something different for each person. Yeah, I don't know that's ever going to be one thing, right? Whether they're running themselves ragged and not getting enough alone time. We don't sit still anymore. We don't sit still without noise. or without looking at our phone. I went to a play over Christmas with my family, and some extended family was there. And, as always, it's like you walk in any restaurant and people have their phones sitting on the restaurant table, like they're going to miss something. I don't know what that's about. But the play intermission happened, and I stand up to stretch my legs, and I look around, and like at least 80% of people who are still in their seats are on their phone. All their families around them, the kids have their phones, and like everybody. And it's crazy. It's crazy. So we don't get quiet time. We don't get time in nature. I could go on and on about this. Like, it's such a passion of mine, because I think people always try to force themselves into this little compartment in terms of, this is how I eat, this is how I sleep, this is how I work. And they're missing out on everything else that actually fills them up and helps them connect and makes them well. And we can't force that with supplements. We can't force that with food. You can't not connect with everything else that's around you.
Why is gut health so important?
A lot of people, I think, will say that it is the core of everything in the body. And I think we have to look a little bit beyond that. And there's a lot of other major organs that come into play, even the brain, the liver, and such. We talk about environment a little bit, but as we start to look at what we come in contact with the environment, we've got this huge tube that runs through us. And that's really how we're, more so than anything, connecting with the outside world. We're sampling all the stuff that we're putting down us. And so as we start to look at everything that can go wrong, and the effect on our digestion, our immune system, the feedback to the brain, the effect on the adrenals even, the effect on thyroid, everything is, kind of spokes out from there. And so when we start to look at everything that can go wrong without the proper support, that's a really fantastic place to start. What I love most about it is that each case that I work with, every loving, amazing patient that I work with has a different presentation. So there's a lot of detective work in it. There's a lot of work to figure out, how to connect the dots and what's going to best support them.
What are some of the most common things you see going wrong with people's guts?
I would say an immense amount of stress and the load on their system, and how that's affecting digestion from the top down. And then for the most part, they're chasing it with diet and supplements, and they'll try gluten-free, and then they'll try dairy-free, and then they'll try some supplements, and then they'll try a medication, and they'll do a few things, but it doesn't quite get at the crux of it. I work a lot with IBS. Now my main focus is SIBO, so 80-90% of my patients have SIBO for sure. And that's a small intestinal bacterial overgrowth. So basically, we've got organisms that line the small intestine and the large intestine, and they grow to a certain number and they don't really go over that. But if something has affected motility in the small intestine in some way, or stopped it to a degree, then there's a buildup of organisms, and then there's a lot of issues. It's like having a lactose intolerance and all that, the bubbly and gut and bloat and that all that comes with it, but on a really chronic basis. So I see that mostly now, but I'd say especially there's always that edge to it. Everyone wants to look at food and supplements, and there's just this whole other spectrum of health that we gain from all this connection and stress management that really needs to be implemented with everybody.
You've heard a lot of client stories throughout this series, and you might be wondering if we could perhaps help you. Supporting people to shift is what we do best. Health is a journey, and we can help you to navigate this with one-on-one support with our clinical naturopaths, hypnotherapists, and counsellors. If working with us one-on-one interests you, go to theshiftclinic.com and click on Shift with Us.
The Shift!
So tell me, what causes SIBO?
Lots of things cause SIBO. So I think we have to step back for just a second and say that SIBO is a secondary condition. It's not a primary condition. A lot of times I have people that have 8 different diagnoses, a ton going on, and nothing seems to be working, and they get this SIBO diagnosis because I think, and again, with great respect, nothing else seems to be working. Let's run this, and they're looking for answers. And the practitioner says, let's run this one more test. And then this comes back positive. And they're like, oh my gosh, this is it. If I just fix this, everything else is going to be fixed. Hallelujah. And we have to remember that SIBO is secondary. It's not primary. So we have to figure out what is affecting motility, whether it's hypothyroid, that's going to set the metabolic rate for everything and slowing things down, adhesions from an ovarian cyst rupturing, or they had some sort of laparoscopy done and there's an adhesion formed, and that will tug on the small intestine and slow motility in that area. Or they might have really bad production of stomach acid and poor production of bile. So they're not cleansing bacteria off as it comes down as well. And they're not cleaning out their small intestine with that bile. And so there's lots of other reasons that SIBO can get set up, but it's finding those connections. SIBO usually needs to be treated, but I think it's overdiagnosed. And I think as we start to look at it, that there are other things to address first. We have to look at foundational things first to see if this is even an issue. And I think my point on it is, before we had the SIBO test, what would we do with a patient that presented with these symptoms? We'd clean up their diet, we'd address their stress, we'd help them with digestion, we'd start all these foundational pieces. And if those don't work, we say, what's next? Is there too much dysbiosis going on? And do we treat this as dysbiosis? So, it's looking at from that perspective, that's where it's kind of become the stumping ground. It's become more widespread in its notoriety. More people are accepting that it's even a diagnosis at this point, which is great for people, in a place where a lot of people aren't maybe practicing alternative medicine. Now, finally, those doctors are saying, yes, this could be an issue. I'll start investigating this a little bit more. But then testing and antibiotics doesn't really make for a healthy person, right? So I think we've got to look at this, step back and look at the bigger picture for a lot of these people.
So I've been having lots of conversations about antibiotics and their effect on the human microbiome. And what I'm finding with SIBO, and I think what the danger is that already we have a bunch of doctors that have a very poor understanding of the gastrointestinal tract, a very poor understanding of the complexities of it. And this is kind of like mainstream medical stuff I'm talking about here, like not everybody. And then comes SIBO, which is like a diagnosis. A diagnosis, there's too much bacteria, we're just going to kill it with antibiotics. What is the end of result of that?
I am not going to say that there aren't some people that are helped in terms of SIBO or dysbiosis of some sort with an antibiotic. There's some people that have taken around and they've walked away and they feel much better and they can get on with things. But I think the majority of people, it's not just putting a Band-Aid on it, it's actually perhaps doing more harm than the Band-Aid, because you already have a person, like if we've gotten to the point where SIBO has gotten set up, your immune system probably isn't as robust to keep the peace with the microbes that are in your gut. The healthy flora that is supposed to be there and in balance probably isn't as much. You probably don't have as good stomach acid production cleaning things off. The mechanics of it all aren't running properly. So then you come into it and say, well, I'm going to fix this. I'm just going to throw an antibiotic in there. It might calm symptoms down a little bit, but it's not necessarily going to fix things in the end. And perhaps if we say, we know what an antibiotic does, it's going to knock down everything. Why is that better? Why are we just praying that the healthy stuff comes back, right? So I think in the hands of somebody who is going to truly go through and rebuild everything properly, it's possible that you'd get a better outcome. But in terms of perhaps medical providers who are just coming on board with SIBO and say, I can run this test now, here's an antibiotic, that scares me. It scares the heck out of me. And it's almost like this is the new proton pump inhibitor. Everybody's prescribing it. It's all going to be okay. And then 5 years from now, we're going to go, oh my God, what did we do? Why are we dumping this into our environment and giving this to all these people? And all of a sudden there's going to be a black box warning on them and says, don't take this for this reason. It's crazy.
Which there kind of is. Well, the World Health Organization's, for 10 years or so now has issued mandates against overuse of antibiotics. Yes. So it is really well known how bad it is.
Yeah.
But let's talk about proton pump inhibitors, because they're another drug that's really overused. Yeah. I feel for doctors a little bit in this regard, because they just don't have a lot in their toolkit. If someone comes to see them, they're bloated or they have reflux or indigestion, they have proton pump inhibitors, they have like over-the-counter antacids, they have antidiarrheals, they have, stuff to help with constipation, perhaps like laxatives.
Yeah.
That's about it. Mm-hmm. They don't have anything that's really repairing or calming or balancing. However, if we look at things just
theoretically, looking at how much proton pump inhibitors have been used even from small babies, and now how much issues with gut and SIBO we have.
Wait a second. They're being used in babies for the listening audience. Like that's just crazy.
Yeah, it's a really big thing. So if a baby has reflux or silent reflux or suspected silent reflux, they're being prescribed proton pump inhibitors. And we now know it's terrible. But
it's terrible.
What do you think the impact of that in relation to SIBO is?
It will be a risk factor for setting SIBO up because, again, if we don't have enough stomach acid production, stomach acid is there for a reason. You break down your food, you actually get signaling of digestion that's happening further down. You convert some enzymes into the proper form. You can convert nutrients into the proper form that we absorb as we're taking those in. And it cleans off the organisms from the food that we are eating. Like, it doesn't matter how much you wash something, stuff's coming in. And so it really helps to knock that down. And so if you go on a proton pump inhibitor for a long length of time, it is setting up that risk. It really is. And so, to me, even if somebody has an active ulcer, there are so many other things that you can do to help fix the ulcer instead of proton pump inhibitors. Ulcers are probably the only reason that, or if somebody goes in and they're just, Barrett's esophagus, like esophagitis or something like really rampant, I could see doing a 2-week round of that to kick this in and doing all the healing that we know to do on the other side along with that, and then transitioning them just to the healing phase. Like, there could be reasons that we could use something very, very small in terms of dosage and duration with that. But that's not how they're using it. You and I both know that. You go in complaining of some symptoms, they run everything. Even if they come back normal, the patient can still be prescribed a proton pump inhibitor, and then they get stuck on it and they don't know how to come off of it. It's crazy.
What's the difference between dysbiosis and SIBO?
Dysbiosis is going to be an imbalance in yeast or bacteria, microbes, could even be parasitic in nature. Dysbiosis is just imbalance. And so is there an imbalance going on in the intestinal tract? And that could be that, and I've seen it when we run stool tests. Sometimes all microbes are low. Like, some people can be like really lacking, or some people can have way too much of something that's not beneficial. We've got to think about the microbiota is like this diverse rainforest, and there's always something that's going to go into that niche. If there's a niche built up because you've knocked something down, something that's going to grow faster, harder, stronger is going to take it over. So I think that's really important to look at. And the difference between that and SIBO is going to be that SIBO is in the small intestine. So dysbiosis more specifically targeted at the large intestine, and overgrowth in the small intestine is SIBO.
Tell me about SIBO testing.
So there's a glucose test and there is a lactulose test. There's 1.5-hour tests. There's 3-hour tests. That depends on who you go through. Basically, the gist of it is you ingest a sugar, one of those sugars, and that moves through the small intestine. And as it passes any kind of bacteria, they're going to consume that sugar, and one of the byproducts that they produce is gas. One of that is hydrogen, one of that is methane. And then methane actually uses up hydrogen to make methane. So when that gas production happens, part of that moves across the lining of the small intestine into our blood. It moves to the lungs, and it actually exchanges out in our breath. And so that's how we can measure it with the breath test. The glucose test is looking more at the upper 1/3 of the small intestine. It doesn't really give us a full picture of the entire length of the small intestine. And when we look at all the controversy around the breath test, one of the main things is that kind of the gold standard in terms of seeing if there's too much fermentation going on in the small intestine is actually to do an aspirate. And so they'll move with a tube down your mouth, through your stomach, into the upper part of the small intestine. They'll probably go down a little ways into the duodenum, but you have 20 feet of small intestine, and you're not going to make it anywhere near, the whole length, nor even to the middle. And so the glucose test results best match up with that aspirate. So they take a sample of fluid and they try to grow it on a dish, what's happening there, right? And so they can match that up. A lactulose breath test, lactulose doesn't get well absorbed, and that's why it's kind of beautiful to be able to use in terms of functionality, moving through that whole small intestine into the large intestine. So we get a preview of that entire length. So basically we've got glucose, which absorbs in the upper 1/3. That's going to match up with the aspirate, and then lactulose, which goes the whole way. And then we basically look at, after they've done a food prep and then done the test over 3 hours, where do the numbers fall? And then we can make a diagnosis from there.
What do you need to exclude in able to kind of go down that SIBO pathway?
So again, with it being secondary, there's a lot of different things that we want to look at. To me, I find that inflammatory bowel disease obviously you need to exclude that, and that would come first. That would take precedence, but that would be a reason why we have a celiac false positive breath test. I've seen autoimmune gastritis patients have SIBO testing that once you figure out that it's autoimmune gastritis and replenish what needs to be replenished and support digestion, the SIBO symptoms go away. So we've got to look from all angles that way.
How do you treat it?
For treatment, it's not as easy as cleaning up the diet. So this is more, again, as we're looking at identifying what is present, it's going to be different for each person on what set this up. So the main way that you treat this is figuring out what set it up and treating that, just hands down. So again, hypothyroid and correcting it. And then what's going on? Why are they hypothyroid? Well, maybe they've got a lot of stress. They've got inflammation going on. So you have to go figure out where that's coming from and address that, support thyroid. Now we have, motility moving forward a little bit better. Where are their symptoms at that point? And working on the foundational pieces with digestive support and all of that. So we've got to step into always step into that first versus I feel this way. This is like the person who goes to the GI doc. I feel this way, and they give them a proton pump inhibitor to walk away, but it's not going to fix it, right? So we've got to think about that. SIBO takes a while to treat. For some people where symptoms don't recover properly, then we would look at herbal antibiotics, and that would be my first recommendation. Something like berberine and oregano, garlic, different combinations of those can be really helpful. And I also feel as we start to look at herbs, yes, they have antimicrobial properties. We cannot say, oh, these are natural, so they aren't going to harm you. But at the same time, when we look at herbs, we know the properties, we know what they offer us, and there's a lot of benefits. Berberine is fantastic for working on leaky gut even. So there's different things that we can come in to actually help restructure things a little bit without completely draining the entire intestinal tract, as you can do with antibiotics.
What are the common dietary things that you'd recommend for people that have SIBO?
If you're eating something and it makes you have bloating and distension in your small intestine, you are usually incredibly uncomfortable. So usually when people present themselves to get help, they've already weaned themselves off of quite a few foods. It's like every time you ate something creamy, you were down for hours on end. You would know not to eat something creamy. So I think people self-correct on a few things before they get to a practitioner. And at some point they're like, maybe they pulled one thing, but now they're pulling multiple things and now the symptoms are getting worse, sort of thing. Personally, with my practice, I work with really complex cases and people that have gone through a lot of practitioners and trying to figure things out in terms of gut. And so when they come to me, they're often so whittled down on the number of foods that they're eating. My first goal is to get them back to eating more. So a lot of times I'm working with people on expansion versus restriction. There is the FODMAP diet that was made famous through the Monash University in Australia. And, that was really created for IBS and not SIBO. And yet it works quite well to calm down symptoms for SIBO. But we're really looking at a couple different things. So FODMAPs is fructooligosaccharides, monosaccharides, and polyols. And it's an acronym basically for indigestible fibers that are in the foods that we eat. So take garlic, for example, very high in fructans, lots of prebiotics in there. And there's things in there that we cannot break down with our own enzymes that we produce. So we basically rely on the billions and billions of microbes that are within us that can produce 50,000 to 60,000 different enzymes collectively to help break the food down. And so they can break it down so we get more nutrition from it. They can break it down so they can fuel off of it, like this beautiful symbiotic relationship. But if you're sending garlic down with SIBO, basically you're increasing this prebiotic and probably going to flare up SIBO, most always. I've not really met a SIBO person that can handle garlic. But basically, they're sending that down. It goes past the microbes. Those microbes are using it and fueling off of it and producing gas. And then you've got this big tumultuous, symptom set for people. So that's for SIBO. When we're looking at IBS, it's a little bit different. Basically, what they found is those FODMAPs cause an osmotic shift in the intestine. So instead of, a lot of gas production, they're basically seeing that a little bit too much fluid starts to be drawn in when those are present. And so for people with IBS, pulling FODMAPs to maybe do a reset and then build, testing those out can be helpful, but the same is this, is true for SIBO. So it's more the fermentation we're looking at, but it's, when anyone has SIBO, they also have IBS. But if you have IBS, you don't have SIBO. So it's a little bit of both in terms of that osmotic shift and that gas production for those.
Have you listened to season 1 of The Shift? If you're enjoying the expert series, you'll love season 1, where we deep dive into the field of gut health with 25 of the world leaders in this area. Head back to your podcast app and find episode 1. It's a great place to start.
So let's talk a little bit about FODMAPs and restrictive diets in the context of people going on the internet. Someone said to try this and they try it and they feel better because they're not having any of the good things that they normally need, right? So these things are fermentables and they're actually some of the best foods you can be eating, like, asparagus, garlic, onion, all of those things. But to them, they're looking at only symptoms and they don't know that depth to kind of go, well, actually some of these things might be needed. How have you seen that play out with people?
I think it's, people will get really stuck on the diet, stuck on very few foods, start to feel isolated because garlic and onion are in everything, in every restaurant. And so it's really difficult to eat out. The symptoms might be calmed down a little bit, but again, it's a Band-Aid. It hasn't fixed it. And from the studies, we don't see that the FODMAP diet is going to help SIBO resolve. So I think people can they can overemphasize the diet in terms of, I'm going to starve this out. I respect completely that there are different doctors out there that have kind of regroup plans. And if somebody's working with you on the FODMAP diet and it's a regroup, all the power to you. I have no problem with that. And that's really fantastic if somebody comes to me and symptoms are everywhere and then we have no idea as you're looking at all the patterns, just nothing's popping out. It's like an elimination diet, but it's a month and a half and you're expanding your foods. It's not, well, I've been on this for 2 years now and I can't eat. Every time I try to go off it, I react. It's the Band-Aid. It's not fixing anything. So we really, really need to look at it more closely and being used widespread. In studies, the FODMAP diet has been shown to lower histamines, which is something, granted. And I think full disclosure, just so everyone knows that I'm not against the FODMAP diet, I run a FODMAP recipe site. So I want to fully disclose that. I think really why I started it up is that people were so limited on what they eat. And so to be able to say, look, here's 800 recipes that are quite robust with, low FODMAPs that are probably going to help you expand. Because a lot of times if you think about it, people, just nature of habit, a lot of people will just pull FODMAPs and not replace things. A lot of people will whittle down on how many foods they can eat versus finding replacements for those and keeping their variety up. So with the site that I created, which is GutRx Gurus, we really get to help people expand. And Rebecca Coombs, who is in Australia, she's one of our gurus in there. A lot of recipes in there are biphasic, which is speaks to a lot of the work that Nirala Jacoby does, which I love Nirala. I respect her greatly. I think the biphasic diet is fantastic as a regroup and you're expanding past. It's like the SCD diet. There's lots of carb altering diets that as alternative practitioners we have utilized to help people reset, and that's beautiful. But nobody goes on phase 1 of SCD diet forever. And that's kind of what the FODMAP diet, and no one's going to go on biphasic phase 1 forever. Like you're using that, you're testing, you're giving things a rest, and you expand. And so again, this is speaking more to not getting stuck on the diets. And my clinical experience is that the more we can keep in from the beginning, the better. And I say that to people because food did not create SIBO. You didn't take a probiotic and get all these symptoms and you taking the probiotic caused this. It was just at the tipping point where that was the part that was like, oh, those symptoms are noticeable. And when I eat those, I'm not guessing that really was a reaction. And that's what you just connect with. You didn't cause this. There's other things that are setting that up. So I think we've got to look at that in terms of food and not overreaching with it, because the studies just are not there. And there was another study that was actually just put out saying that FODMAP diet reduces hydrogen production. And so that's going to be the headline. And yet when you go and actually look at the study, it was on healthy individuals, not any with IBS or SIBO. And when you look through it, like they finagled the data. I mean, the p-values were not even in range. There was a p-value of 9 on one of them. Like it was just crazy. But that'll be the headline, right?
What are some of the things that you would say are definite no's for everyone around digestive health?
Stress. It would be stress, honestly. We all are eating on the go, running with our hair on fire, not getting enough sleep, staring at our blue screen all day long, and any moment that we might have any break to actually breathe, we got to check email. We got to check our screen. We got to look up a news thing. We got to watch a video. I mean, it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. So honestly, I think stress is a big one. And I'd say too, stress is all encompassing. I mean, my goodness, the conversation we could have just around that in terms of our environment and the impact. And part of it is everything that we're getting loaded with. And part of it is that none of us get to unload and reset. So I think both of those are equally important. And then additionally, in terms of digestion, I would say, I don't know that it would be any one thing that you take. It would be more of trying to figure out where inflammation is coming from. Is that the other big one. Those two, to me, together drive a lot of imbalances within the gut, more so than anything. Probably the third one I'd say is again, and I cannot with my licensing say do not take an antibiotic or a medication that your doctor says, nor am I saying to go do this. But if I am presented with a medication, you better be sure that I'm going to go up, down, left, and right on what does this do? Can we do anything first? How many times do you see this actually knock this out? I'll say I do get calls from time to time. Somebody has a bladder infection and they want me to fix it naturally, and I'm like, no, you need to go get an antibiotic. Like there are some things that you just take it for. When you have a sinus infection, when you have other things that can, you can do nasal irrigation, you can actually do silver spray up your nose. There's a lot of things that you can do to get to that area because you can reach it. So there's other things to try first versus just going on antibiotics. I mean, I just started up with a new patient a couple days ago, and again, with full respect to the doctor, every time she got a cold, he'd give her an antibiotic. And she's like, I just learned colds are viral. I didn't know. And so there just came to a point when she'd literally been put on upwards of 20 rounds of antibiotics. And it, in her lifetime easily. I think that's the other point to make too. When I do an intake session, on my intake, I say, do you take antibiotics frequently? Almost everybody says no. I always go back to that question when we have a conversation, and I say, how often is infrequently? And they'll say, I don't know, maybe once a year, right? And so I'm like, for how many years? And, most of their adult life, basically. So 15 rounds, 16 rounds, 20 rounds. And people don't think twice about it. They just don't think twice about it. We've got to get back to work, right? We can't be sick, can't have any downtime. Everything has to be forced.
What's a healthy relationship to food versus an unhealthy relationship to food?
I think looking forward to eating, thinking about food as how good that's going to make me feel. There's an asterisk on that because it's not the emotional part, it's the energy part. It's, everyone knows, everyone has had a meal at dinner, whether it's been at home or at a restaurant, where their energy just feels even the entire time. They feel satisfied with the meal, their energy is good, they feel like they can walk away. And they just like, that was good. But it wasn't stuffed, I have to unbutton my pants, now I'm tired and need to go take a nap, and I'm getting brain fog, and there's the indigestion that goes with it. We've got to look at food as fueling us and having this connection that gives us nutrition, but having the love and connection with it as well, like thinking about where it was grown, what kind of stages happened and steps along the way to actually get that to me.
How do people get into that state? So how do they go from this sort of mindless eating where they might be emotionally eating or have a poor relationship with food to actually having a relationship with food that helps them thrive?
Yeah. So I would say not everyone's going to do an about face the next day, and I think that can be really overwhelming. I would think about it in terms of if you push off eating earlier in the day because you're kind of scared of it, you're often overeating in the evening. If you push off eating in the earlier part of the day, you're almost setting yourself up to eat more into the evening. So I always have everybody pick a lean, healthy breakfast, and you're going to start with that, and that is just your first goal. Don't change anything else. And when you have that meal, you have to sit down. It can't be on the run. It can't be in the car. And I want you to actually look at the food, smell it, think about what it's going to taste like, take your first bite and put your fork down or spoon down or whatever and taste the food. So to me, that usually starts to set the tone for that meal. And I have them do that for a week, and then we start working on lunch. And we just start slowly moving that way. And what I'll find is if we're having something for breakfast that's a bit more substantial, the binging in the evening starts to subside. So that starts to build the confidence as well. And so it's really, to me, about replacing oftentimes and having them focus on a few easy tasks and then working on some mindfulness around that. And I have them do that with their first bite at each meal, which really, to me, again, sets the stage, slows everything down a little bit. And then there's a better connection going on there. Definitely cleaning out the pantry. If you feel addicted to food, you can't have the cookies in the house. And they can't be in the house because you have kids. You need to set a better example and do what's right for you so they see that. People sometimes use their kids as a little bit of a scapegoat there. Like, well, I have to have them around for them. Like, they're fine. Go out for ice cream. You don't have to have those foods in the house all the time because we don't want them eating that on a daily basis. It's the same thing.
Can you tell me what's been the biggest shift that you've ever had in your life?
Probably moving from psychology to nutrition was a big one. Having my daughter was a very big one. Having a focus on SIBO and really finding a niche there that rang true with me. So I think all of those have been pretty big shifts. I think coming out of school and feeling like an adult, that was pretty awesome.
How did you feel in that moment?
That I'd found more of a purpose, which I thought was really interesting as I kind of remember it and look back on it. It was that I found a purpose and direction. You know, I'd been having a lot of fun, don't get me wrong. I had a great, 20s and early 30s. I wasn't moving from job to job, not really, finding my groove. And I found my groove in what I was passionate about. So that was a really big shift for me.
What is one piece of advice you would give to somebody that's wanting to make a shift in their health?
Along the journey, you're going to need to find people that have the same mindset as you do and wanting to make changes, or they've already made changes. Somebody that you can hang out with, some group that you can belong to get the support system and the connection to make things happen. Because I think staying sometimes in the same rut, being surrounded by the people that don't share those same values that you're starting to change and move towards can kind of pull you back. So really finding that connection, I think, is really important. I think the other thing I would say is that you can't change your partner. You can't. You can show them how good it makes you feel to do whatever you're doing, but you can't make them do it with you, and you can't change their habits. And they might come home with a fast food pizza, and you're still eating what you eat because you're going to be true to yourself and true to your goals. And then you might figure out some conversation around trying to not have them sabotage you. But like that, I think that's so important because we want to set people up for success. And there's always this very strange dynamic. One part of the partnership is moving forward, the other part will feel like they're losing something. They're not going to change like you want to change, and you might be going off and doing something that they don't want to do. And so there's sometimes a weird dynamic with that. So just finding, a best friend that wants to do it, or a friend that wants to do it, or a group can give you that outlet without you always having to unload on the partner.
There were so many great insights by Angela. Let's revisit some of the key parts and talk about what action you can take as a result of it. Number 1,
Everyone has a connection to food, some good and some bad. It's this connection with food that drives our choices and behaviour around food and what we eat. Number 2. SIBO is a condition that results in an excess of bacteria in your small intestine. These bacteria then consume fermentables like fibre in the diet and create excesses of gas, which leads to pain and discomfort. This isn't something that happens overnight, but once this imbalance occurs, it can take quite a while to reverse it. Number 3. SIBO is a secondary condition, which means that it is a result of something else. Reasons you might develop SIBO include infections of the gut like Salmonella poisoning or Giardia that lead to a disruption in bacteria, low stomach acid, which is normally there to keep bacteria in check, or issues that have led to a decrease in motility or movement through the gut, including hypothyroidism and adhesions due to conditions like endometriosis. Number 4. SIBO needs to be treated holistically, looking at all the elements of your health. Simply taking an antibiotic will not lead to resolution. You need to treat the whole picture in order to succeed. Number 5. Many people with SIBO will also have SIFO or switch between the two. SIFO stands for small intestinal fungal overgrowth, which means there is an excess of fungal organisms like Candida or Rhodotorula or other fungal organisms in the small intestine. There is no real test for SIFO, so it can be tricky to determine what the main issue is. Again, this is why comprehensive treatment is required. Learning is great, but doing is better. Here are 3 things you can do as a result of this conversation. Number 1. If the symptoms described in this episode resonated with you and you want to explore your options, consider making an appointment with a SIBO specialist practitioner like Angela or a naturopathic gut specialist at Shift. Taking a holistic approach is best, and getting the right advice will mean that you'll put down the right pathway when it comes to testing and treatment. What I've found over the years is that the SIBO healing journey is so multi-directional and results can be up and down. Without someone to help you navigate it, it really is difficult to know what's working and what you need to do as your next part of the journey. Number 2, don't forget to look at stress in the context of your symptoms. We are all so stressed so much of the time that it has become normalised, and we're not doing enough to combat it. Simple things that you can do for stress, including making sure that you're breathing properly, including meditation in your daily routine, and finding some space to do the things that give you joy. Number 3, look at how you can develop a more healthy relationship with food. Do you associate reward with junk food? Do you only eat clean when you feel amazing? By examining these parts of you, you can really get into the deeper reasons behind this unhealthy behaviour. I also find personally that patients that do have SIBO-type conditions do tend to develop unhealthy relationships with food over time because so many healthy foods that they eat seem to cause reactions. This can become a vicious cycle, and we need to look at the emotional aspects of this condition because when we're in stress, we're more likely to have a food reaction. There was so much information in this episode, and I really could have talked to Angela all day. If you loved this episode, please give Angela a shout out on her Facebook page, which is called Angela Pifer Functional Medicine Nutritionist, or visit her website, SIBOguru.com. That's SIBOguru.com. As usual, links will be in the show notes. And lastly, before I let you go, I have a huge favour to ask. Have you left a review for The Shift yet? It only takes a moment, but it really helps us to reach more people. So please jump into your app and review this podcast. If you're listening on Spotify, then you can find us in iTunes on your desktop or laptop by searching The Shift and review us there. Thank you so much for your support with this. In the next episode of the Shift Expert series, we have the wonderful Kate Reardon, naturopath, intuitive healer, and founder of fasting detox retreat, Natural Instinct Healing. She is an absolute trailblazer in the area of transformational healing, and we're going to deep dive into how our emotions impact our health, the benefits of fasting, and so much more. You don't want to miss this one.
Coming up on The Shift.
What is fasting?
So fasting is the abstinence of food. There's so many different types of fasting out there.
How did it feel for you to see somebody walk in like that and to see them walk out a completely different person?
Like, the only thing that I can describe it as is miraculous.
Do you think emotional wellness is important to gut health?
Absolutely. I'm laughing because my view and opinion is that it is all emotional.
I hope you're loving the information in The Shift as much as I do. But maybe you're thinking, what do I need to do for me? Take our online assessment to discover what your gut is up to. Go to theshiftclinic.com/quiz.